What I would like to do for a few minutes this afternoon is talk about forced migrants. There's two groups of forced migrants, refugees and internally displaced people. As we know, migration has been an issue for centuries. Since biblical times, people have been moving across the world for a variety of reasons. Right now, there are 65 million forced migrants in the world, the largest number in recent history. And these numbers, I would like to point out, do not include economic migrants who move around the world looking for a better life for themselves and their people. They do not fall into these categories. Definitions are important because definitions determine where you fit into the sequence of assistance with the United States government and with the international organizations. So when we talk about migrants, migrant is a generic term that refers to anybody who moves within a country or across a country for basically any reason. A refugee is a person who's moved across an international border due to a well-founded fear of persecution, fear of generalized violence, or to move away from a natural disaster. And they are individuals who have registered with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the organization that takes care of refugees. And once they have registered, they receive assistance and protection from the UN High Commissioner's office. An internally displaced person is someone who, for the same reasons, has moved within its country, within his or her country, from their habitual place of residence due to conflict or something like that, but do not cross an international border. They are not entitled to any international assistance. They are the responsibility of their host government. And there are very few people or very few organizations that are able to provide assistance to them on a regular basis. Most of the world's refugees are from the nations in the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia. And what causes them to become refugees most often is conflict, ethnic strife, violent extremism, and natural disasters. And because of that, they move across borders to refugee camps sometimes. Actually, the majority of refugees live in urban centers and cities and not in camps. For Central America, the driving force is gang violence and exceedingly high homicide rates that force people to move. But in general, most people who become refugees do not come to the United States and do not go to Europe. 84% of the refugees in the world today remain in the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia. They move across the border to a neighboring country and settle in a refugee camp there. Some of the major refugee generating companies, I think, are well known to most of us. Syria, Yemen, Nigeria, Eritrea, South Sudan, and Somalia. The countries receiving most refugees, the big one is Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Kenya, and most recently, because of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda. A word about refugee camps, because I think most people think when a refugee flees a situation and moves across the border, once they get to the refugee camp, things are better, and that's not really the case. Refugee camps are very inhospitable and dangerous places. All the political divides, the ethnic divisions, the religious problems travel to that camp and are present in every refugee camp. It is very difficult for children to move around unaccompanied in these camps. Boys are recruited for militia groups, and girls are victims of assault. Many of these refugee camps are fenced in, so no one can leave without the permission of the host government. And most often in these camps, the gates are locked at sundown. Everybody leaves, and the gates are opened at sunup. And what happens in those camps is their business, not the host government. They don't get involved. So theft, rape, assaults are commonplace in refugee camps. They're very dangerous places. The average time a person spends in a refugee camp is 17 years. The other example is the Dadaab refugee camp for Somalis in northeastern Kenya. It's been there for 27 years. There are 3 generations of refugees living in that camp, and there's no end to that in sight. Reaching a refugee camp is a very temporary solution for most refugees. They hope to move on, or at least move into the city or the country itself away from the refugee camp if they possibly can do that. The other group that falls within the forced migrant category is internally displaced people. Again, they are the responsibility of the host governments. They're driven to their displacements by the same causes as refugees. It's civil war, it's ethnic problems, it's violent extremism, and it's natural disasters. They tend to be the poorest people in the country, in their country. They lack the resources, because it still does take resources to move across borders and get into refugee camps. A lot of this population, a lot of it is elderly or very young, so they are unable to move to other countries. And so they move a distance, but not that far from the conflicts that are going on. So quite often, IDPs move multiple times. And each time you move with fewer and fewer belongings. So by your 3rd or 4th move, it's what you can carry in a bag, and that's about it. And that's what the refugees have to work, or the IDPs have to work with. They also have a very difficult relationship with their governments. IDPs are not popular with the government. Most often, if they're displaced within the country and there's a conflict going on, the government assumes that they're families of refugees, or of rebels, or of ethnic groups that are in disfavor. So they're not about to get much assistance from the host government, from their own government. The UN and donor governments can provide assistance to refugees, but it's with the permission of the host government. And as we've seen over the past year in Syria and Yemen, the government can cut that off very quickly when they have a reason to, and all assistance stops to these displaced populations. So it's the countries in the world where most of the IDPs, that's their acronym, are located are where you would think they are, with the conflicts going on in the world today. They are mostly low and middle income countries, so they cannot, even if they wanted to, take care of the IDPs. The largest concentration, and I hesitate to mention this because it's a little bit of a special category, is Colombia, where they have over 7 million IDPs, but that's due to a very long war with the FARC, and that's 20 or 30 years of conflict there. But after Colombia, it's Syria and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Yemen, Uganda, Somalia, Iraq. These are where the largest populations in the world, the IDP populations in the world, are to be found. And that is going to continue for an extended period of time. And their lives are very difficult compared to all other migrants in the international system. Now, these civil wars, the ethnic problems, they're all going to continue. And we can expect to see more of this, more refugees, and the internally displaced people increase by the day. There's a new twist to this coming, which is going to complicate life in the 21st century. A new trend is also generating refugees, and that's environmental change. And people are moving to other countries and within their own country. And there is no regulation and so far no thought that in an official way by the international community to deal with these environmental migrants. And they are going to increase and become very large numbers as time goes on. So I think we can expect a lot more refugees, a lot more displaced people, and a complicated situation with environmental refugees in the rest of the 20th century. The Refugee and Immigration Collaborative, connecting global neighbors. This collaborative was brought together with the support from Calvin College, the Calvin Alumni Association, and the Calvin Center for Christian Scholarship.